Today, I have a 3-hour English grammar masterclass for you to help you go from A1 to C1 by the end of this lesson. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. First, we're going to review basic grammar concepts. Now, even if you're a more advanced student, pay attention because I see mistakes with these concepts all the time. So let's get started. First, let's review the difference between still, yet, and already. Let's start off with already. We use already to talk about something that has happened or may have happened. So think about the verb tenses. We're talking about the past, and your verb tenses are going to be the past simple or the present perfect. For example, I could say, I already ate. I already ate. Of course, that action took place in the past. Now, you could invite me to the movies and I could say, I've already seen that movie. Present perfect. I've already seen that movie. And of course, it was in the past that I saw that movie. Now notice for the placement of already, it's generally placed before the main verb. So now it's your turn. Pause the video and put a sentence using already in the past simple and the present perfect in the comments below. Now let's talk about yet. We generally use yet in a question form or a negative sentence. And your verb tense is going to be the present perfect. As a question, you're asking a question about the past. So I could ask, have you eaten yet? Have you eaten yet? And of course, if you want to answer yes, you would use which one? Yes, I've already eaten. Now we can combine a question and the reply could be in the negative, so they could both use yet. For example, I could ask you, have you decided yet? And your answer in the negative would be, no, I haven't decided yet. Now notice the placement of yet. We put it after the main verb, so it's generally at the end of your sentence. All right, so now why don't you try a question with yet and then a reply to that question, and your reply will be in the negative as well. So put those two examples in the comments. Now let's talk about still. We use still to talk about an action that started in the past and continues until now. Your verb tenses are generally going to be the present simple or the present continuous. For example, I could say, I'm still going to the party. So keep in mind, I made a decision to go to the party maybe last week, okay? I said, I'm going to the party. Now, maybe the weather is really bad today, so a lot of people aren't going to the party anymore. But I want to confirm that this action that happened in the past, my decision, it still applies now. So I can say, I'm still going to the party. I'm still going to the party. Now we use this with routines a lot, which is why you'll hear it in the present simple. For example, I could say, I still go to the gym every day. So I started going to the gym every day in the past, maybe a month ago. So my friend, who I haven't seen in a while, wants to know if I still go to the gym. And I could say, yeah, I still go to the gym every day. Now notice the placement of still, just like with already, we're going to put it before the main verb. And you know what to do. Now it's your turn to practice. So why don't you try a sentence in the present simple and present continuous and put those in the comments below. Amazing job. Now let's review the difference between do and make. I hear lots of mistakes even from advanced students with these two, and there'll be a quiz at the end of this section to make sure you really know how to use do and make. Now let me give you an example sentence. Last night I the dishes and I dinner. Okay, in this case, what do we need? Do we need do? Do we need make? Put it in the comments below. What do you think we need? Well, first of all, you need to remember that regardless of which one you use, they're verbs, so you have to conjugate them according to your time reference. So my time reference is last night, so I know I'm talking in the past, so I need to conjugate my verbs in the past. Last night, I did the dishes and I made dinner. Did you get them right? Now, let's talk about the rules of when you use do and make. First of all, let me give you a tip. So remember this. If we're talking about an action in general, we use do. If we're talking about producing something, we use make. So that's a general tip you can follow, but just keep in mind there are specific expressions that require one or the other. So you need to keep those in mind as well. So first, let's talk about these general rules. Let's talk about when you use do. We use do with work, chores, and tasks. This is one I commonly see students confuse because I hear a lot of students say, I made my homework. I made my homework. But you don't make homework, okay? You do homework. You do a job. You do chores. You do a task. We use the verb do. Now, we also use do with an unspecified activity, and you're probably very familiar with the question, what are you doing tonight? What are you doing right now? It's a general question. I'm not asking about a specific activity. We use do. What are you doing tonight? Now, we also use do a lot when we replace a verb if the meaning is clear. So in my original example, I said, last night I did the dishes. Do the dishes. But there's another verb that we can use. You can wash the dishes. Now, because the meaning is clear, I can replace the verb wash with do. That might be a little more of an advanced thing for you to understand, but just for now, remember this expression. You do the dishes. So you've already just added one natural expression to your vocabulary because a native English speaker, we're not really going to say wash the dishes. We say do the dishes. So now let's talk about make. Remember, we use make when you're producing something. So anything that was produced, designed, developed, or constructed, we could use make. For example, I could say this t-shirt was made in China. Now, we also use make specifically with food, drinks, and meals. And that's why I said, last night I made dinner. Can you make me a snack? Can you make me a smoothie, a beverage? Can you make me a cup of coffee? We also use make when you produce an action or a reaction from someone. For example, I could watch a movie and I could say, oh wow, that movie made me really sad. That movie made me really sad. It produced a reaction within me. Traffic makes me so angry. That's something that a lot of people say, right? Here's a good one. We use make with plans and decisions. So think of a plan could be, for example, making a dinner reservation. And with decision, you make a decision. So I could ask you, have you made a decision yet? Have you made a decision yet? Now finally, we use make when you produce sounds. For example, I could say, my microphone made a really weird buzzing noise. Or I could say, my lights are making this really high-pitched noise. We can also use it with any sort of verbal sounds. For example, at the end of a presentation, I could say, I really like that comment you made about global warming. So you make a comment because that's a sound you produce. Now let's talk about some general expressions that use either do or make. Remember, expressions in English, you just have to memorize them. So just put these ones into your vocabulary, write them down, and make sure you understand if they use do or make. So our first one, you do someone a favor. So this is a very common expression. I could say, oh, I have a lot of homework to do. Remember, you do homework. Or I have a lot of chores to do. You do chores, you do work. I have a lot of chores to do. Can you do me a favor and make the dinner reservation? So notice, I use do and make in that sentence. Can you do me a favor and make the dinner reservation? Because remember, we use make with plans and arrangements and decisions, but we're using do someone a favor. Think of that just as an expression. Do someone a favor. So can you do me a favor? Hopefully you said yes. Now I'm sure you're already familiar with this expression, but I'll share it anyway. And that's, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do for a living? But most of the time we don't include for a living and we simply say, what do you do? And of course, I'm asking you about your job and we use do. Now, interestingly, we have another expression which is make a living, to make a living. Now, when you make a living by doing something, it means that's your primary source of income. So I could say, I make a living by doing YouTube videos. That's my primary source of income. That's how I make a living. So somebody could ask me, what do you do? I'm a YouTuber. Well, how do you make a living? Because they might be asking me, okay, but how do you make money? And of course I would say, I make a living by recording YouTube videos. That's how I make a living. Now, of course, you also make money. So you make a living which is related to money, and then also you make money. So again, somebody could ask me, what do you do? I'm a YouTuber, but how do you make money? How do you make money on YouTube, right? That's always the mystery. People want to know that. So just remember those two expressions. One of them uses do because it's a general category, but then specifically almost about producing, right? Thinking toward general category. You make money, you make a living. That's more about production. So we're using make. Now, another one that doesn't really fit into the category, but you can think of it as an expression, and that's make a mistake. You make a mistake, okay? So you don't do a mistake. Sometimes I hear that. You make a mistake. It's just an expression. So you could say, I was doing my homework, or I was doing my taxes. That's another one where we're replacing the verb, which is probably file. I was filing my taxes, but we replace that verb with do. I was doing my taxes and I made a mistake. Or we could combine two makes. I was making dinner and I made a mistake. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the time you're going to be mixing and matching in one sentence. I'll leave you with a positive expression. Think of this as an expression, and this one's with do. You do your best. Do your best. So if you say, Jennifer, I'm not sure if I can pass this quiz at the end of the video, I'm going to say, just do your best. It doesn't matter if you make a mistake, just do your best. So that's a nice word of encouragement, an expression of encouragement that you can use with someone if they're feeling a little apprehensive or tentative about doing something. You can say, just do your best. It doesn't matter if you make a mistake, just do your best. So with that, let's get to the quiz. So I'm going to share the quiz on the screen. You're going to have 10 questions to answer. I'll leave it up for a minute, so just pause the video. You'll need more time. And then after that minute, it will display the answers. So make sure you let us know in the comments how you did on the quiz. How many did you get right out of 10? Did you make any mistakes? And of course, just do your best. So now let's do the quiz. So how did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments below, and let's continue on with our next section. And let's look at the difference between do, did, or does. What's the difference between do, does, and did? Well, you need to understand that all three of these are just different forms of the verb to do. So the verb to do is the infinitive. Now, do and does are the present simple conjugations of the verb. And you simply choose one or the other based on the subject that you have. So if you're forming a sentence and your subject is I, you, we, or they, you need to choose do. If your subject is he, she, or it, so third person singular, you need to choose does. And that's it. That's the only difference between do or does in affirmative sentences in the present simple. But keep in mind that do as a verb is used in very specific sentences in the present simple. So for example, you do chores. You do chores. The verb do is what we need to complete the sentence. So I could say, I do chores every Sunday. This is a routine, is in the present simple. Because my subject is I, then I need do. Now, you can also do homework. For example, do is the verb that we use with homework. Now, I could say my sister, which of course is she as a subject, my sister does homework every night. Again, this is a routine, so I need the present simple. My subject is my sister, she, so I need does. Now let's talk about did. Did is the past simple form of the verb to do. And as a past simple verb, there's no difference with subjects. So you use did for all subjects. So that one is easier to remember. And of course, if it's the past simple, then we just need to make sure that our time reference is in the past. So I could say, we did our homework last night. She did her homework this morning, assuming this morning is already in the past, because right now is this afternoon or this evening. So this morning is in the past. She did her homework this morning. So notice, it doesn't matter if I use we or she. The subject doesn't matter because did is used for all subjects. You just need to make sure that your time reference is a past time reference, where do and does, your time reference is going to be a routine action. So you're going to hear time references like always, usually, every. Then you know it's a present simple. You're doing awesome. Let's move on and look at later and after. Later is most commonly used as an adverb, and it means at a time in the future. It's not a specific time. For example, I could say, I'll wash the dishes. Now, this is just a statement about something I'm going to do. You already know it's in the future because I used will, I'll wash the dishes. So if you'd like to add a time reference, when will you wash the dishes? You can choose later, and you can say, I'll wash the dishes later. But what does later mean? Does it really tell the person when you'll wash the dishes? Not really, because it's not a specific time reference. All we know is that you're not going to do it right now, and you'll do it at some point in the future. I'll wash the dishes later. Now, after is most commonly used as a preposition. We use after to show the sequence of events. And those sequence of events can be in terms of time, in terms of place, or in terms of order. But it is commonly used in terms of time. Sequence of events in time, which means one event is going to happen later than another event. So really, it has that same meaning as later in the sense that it's a time in the future. So what's different about them? Well, it's really just the sentence structure and how you use them, because after is a preposition. So I could say, I'll wash the dishes after something else. That's the key. We generally use after and then something else because it shows the relationship between two things. So wash the dishes, something else. What's the order of them? Which one comes first? That's how we use after. So I could say, I'll wash the dishes after I watch the movie. So I have wash dishes, watch movie, but I don't know the order. And that's what after helps us do, show the order. And in this case, it's order in time. I'll wash the dishes after I watch the movie. Now notice how I used a full clause, a full sentence with a subject, a verb, and an object. I'll wash the dishes after I watch the movie, a full clause. We don't need to do that. You can simply have a noun as well. So it could be two objects, just two nouns rather than two actions. So I could say, I'll wash the dishes after the movie. After the movie, okay? So you don't have to use a full clause, and it's probably very common for native speakers to just use the object and not include the action. I'll wash the dishes after the movie. Now here's the mistake I see students make. They say something like, I'll wash the dishes later the movie. So they use later and then they include a something, a noun, or even a clause. You can't do that. You can't say, I'll wash the dishes later the movie. Generally, we use later, period. I'll wash the dishes later. And that's it. So if you want to specify an action or a thing that comes next, you use after, and then you can specify a noun or an action. I'll wash the dishes after the movie. That's correct. Now, one final thing you can do with after is you can leave out the action or the noun. So just like I'll say, I'll wash the dishes later, period, you can do the same thing with after. I'll wash the dishes after, period. We do this when the context is obvious. So let's say you and your friend just talked about watching a movie. You're sitting on the couch. You have the remote in your hand. It's obvious. So when you say, oh, I'll wash the dishes after, your friend knows that it's after the movie. It's obvious based on context. So if it's obvious based on context, grammatically, you can leave it out. And then you will have after and just a period. You don't have to specify the action or the noun. So just remember, probably the most important thing to remember is that you can't say later the movie. You can't say that. That's the most common mistake that I see. Amazing job. Now let's talk about cannot as one word, cannot as two words, and can't. Let's start with cannot as one word. So really pay attention that this is one word, and spelling, we have two N's, but it's in one word. Now cannot is the negative form of the verb can. That's it, simple as that. So let's take a positive sentence with can. I could say, I can pick you up at the airport. I can pick you up at the airport. That's a positive sentence. But if I want to make this sentence negative, all I need to do is change can with cannot. Remember, one word, two N's. So that would be, I cannot pick you up at the airport. So to make a positive can sentence negative, simply use one word, cannot, and replace that with can. It's as simple as that. Now, let's talk about can't. Notice the spelling. There's one end and it's a contraction, right? Every time you see the apostrophe, you know it's a contraction. So can't is just the contracted form of cannot. You can think of it as the short form. Now, you use it in the exact same way. So we take our positive sentence, I can pick you up at the airport. And then to make it negative, we just change it with can't. Can't. I can't pick you up at the airport. Can't is more common than using cannot, the longer form. Now, let's talk about cannot as two words. First of all, know that this is not the negative form of the verb can, okay? It's not the negative form. If you use it as the negative form, in spoken English, you won't hear a difference. But in written English, if you use cannot as two words, it's a spelling mistake. As simple as that, it's a spelling mistake. Okay, because the correct spelling of the negative form of can is cannot, one word. But cannot as two words still exists, but it's not very commonly used. we can use it, for example, when you have not in one part of a sentence, and then can is just your verb of that sentence. But can and not, when they're two words, aren't together, okay? Their relationship isn't together. So for example, you're probably familiar with the expression, not only, but. That's a very common expression in English. Not only X, but also Y. Not only, but. So notice in this expression, I have the word not only. Now, theoretically, my verb in this sentence could be can. And if that's the case, you might see can and not side by side. But they're not together. It's not making can negative. Not relates to not only, but. Or another expression that uses not. So for example, I could say, I can not only pick you up at the airport, I can also help you unpack. Okay, just to give an example. So notice, I can now not only pick you up at the airport. So can is just the verb in the sentence. It's not connected with not only, but. I can not only pick you up at the airport, I can also help you unpack. So that's just theoretically you could see can and not side by side as two separate words, but honestly that's not very common and I don't think you're going to see that. When you see can and not side by side as two words, most likely it's just a spelling mistake and they wanted to make can negative, which is one word, cannot. So to summarize, cannot as one word is the negative form of can. Can't is the contraction of cannot. It's the most commonly used. Cannot as two words is possible, but it's not the negative form of the verb can. So now you know how to use these, and now of course it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 3 examples, one with cannot, the negative form, one with can, the contraction, and then why not try I can not only, but. That would be a pretty advanced structure to practice. So you can leave all those examples in the comments below. You're doing wonderful. Let's continue on and look at come and came. What's the difference between come and came? Well, there's a very simple answer to this question. First, we have to know that the verb is to come. That's the infinitive form of the verb. So then you take your infinitive form and you're going to do 2 things. You're going to conjugate it with the subject and you're going to conjugate it with the time reference as well. The conjugations of the verb to come are the base infinitive is come, the past simple is came, and the participle is come. So your 3 forms of the verb, come, came, come. Come, came, come. Irregular conjugation. Now, we can use the base form in the present simple verb tense. The present simple, of course, we're talking about facts or routines. I could say, she always comes late. She always comes late. So notice, I take my verb come, but then I have to think about my subject, which is she. So I have to add an S to the verb come so it's conjugated correctly with my subject, she. She always comes late. Now, if it was they as a subject, it would be come because I don't add an S. I only add an S for he, she, it subjects. They always come late. She always comes late. They always come late. Now, I can take that same sentence, but I could talk about yesterday. If I talk about yesterday, now my time reference is in the past, So I have to conjugate the verb in the past, and in this case, I need the past simple. Your time reference will tell you what verb tense you need. Yesterday is an indicator of the past simple. In the past simple, there are no different conjugations. We only use the verb came with all subjects. So I can say, she came late yesterday. She always comes late. That's the present simple. She came late yesterday. They always come late. The present simple. They came late yesterday. The past simple. So now you know how to use come and came, but what about that third form of the verb? That's the past participle, which is also come. We use the past participle most commonly with the present perfect verb tense. The present perfect verb tense is have or has as your auxiliary verb, and then your past participle, which in this case is come. So I could say, she's come late 3 times this week. She's. Notice that S in my contraction is actually the verb has. She has come, she has, she's come late 3 times this week. Now I'm using the present perfect here because my time reference is unfinished. It starts in the past, but it's an unfinished time reference because this week is still in progress and it's possible for her to come late again. She's come to work late 3 times this week. Now, in the present perfect verb tense, the past participle come doesn't change, but we do conjugate our verb has or have depending on the subject. So if my subject is they, I need the auxiliary verb have. They have, they've come late 3 times this week. So that's how you would use come as the past participle. To summarize, we have our verb to come, and then we have the 3 forms of the verb. The first form, come, the second form, came, and the third form, come. You need to make sure you're conjugating your verb with your time reference and your subject as well. Come is a very common verb in English, so you should definitely feel confident using it in your speech. So to do that, you need to practice. So why don't you leave 3 examples, one with each form of the verb, present simple, past simple, and present perfect, and of course you can try different subjects as well to make this very challenging, and leave your examples in the comments below. Let's keep going and look at didn't and wasn't. Both of these are the past simple forms, and both of them are past simple negative. Wasn't is the past simple negative form of the verb to be, but wasn't is only used with the subjects I, he, she, and it. Didn't is a past simple negative form, but it's an auxiliary verb, which means it doesn't have a base verb itself. It's used with any base verb. So our sentence structure would be subject, didn't, base verb, to form a complete sentence that's past simple negative. To understand both of these, let's start with a positive sentence in the present. So we'll do a present simple positive sentence, and then we'll see how we can change that sentence into the past simple negative so you can see the transformation of how we use didn't and wasn't. So let's start with our positive present simple sentence for the verb to be. I'm there. I'm there. Pretty simple, right? To be there. I'm there. Or I could say, she's there. Now, I can make this sentence negative in the present simple simply by adding not. I'm not there. She isn't there. But remember, wasn't is the form of the verb to be, and it's negative, but it's used in the past simple. So I need to take my two sentences and have a past simple time reference. So let's use yesterday. Yesterday, I know I'm in the past simple, and I know that my sentence is going to be negative. So I can say, yesterday, she wasn't there. Yesterday, I wasn't there. So that's how the transformation took place from having a present simple positive to present simple negative to past simple negative. And remember, wasn't is only used for the subjects I, he, she, it. So let's do the same thing and see how we can get to didn't. So let's start with a present simple positive sentence. I go to bed at 10:30. So here my verb is go, to go. I go to bed at 10:30. Now, when we take regular verbs, excluding to be as a verb has different rules, okay? So we take regular verbs like the verb go, we have our positive in the present simple. To form the negative in the present simple, I need an auxiliary verb. And that auxiliary verb that I'm going to use is don't. I don't go to bed at 10:30. This is the auxiliary verb for the subjects I, you, we, and they. I don't go to bed at 10:30. So now I have a negative sentence, but it's in the present simple. It talks about a routine, but I want to talk about a past simple. So I can use the keyword yesterday. So I know I'm in the past simple. Yesterday, I didn't go to bed at 10:30. So to form a negative sentence in the past simple for regular verbs, we need to follow our structure subject, didn't, and then our base verb. Our base verb is go. I didn't go to bed at 10:30 yesterday. So remember, wasn't is only used with the verb to be, and it's only used with the verb to be with the subjects I, he, she, it. Didn't is used for regular verbs in the past simple negative as the auxiliary verb. And your sentence structure is subject, didn't, base verb. That's how you would form complete sentences in the past simple negative. So now it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave two examples, one with wasn't and one with didn't. Put them in the comments below and make sure you have a past simple reference. So it could be yesterday, but it could be other past simple time references as well. You're doing so great. Let's keep going and look at do you and are you. Both of these are question forms in the present simple, but they use different verbs and different structures. So let's begin with are you. Now, are, of course, is the verb to be. So are you is forming a question in the present simple using the verb to be. Our subject is you. So that's why we need are, because that's the conjugated verb to be with our subject you. Now we use the verb to be in the present simple for facts. Facts about the world or facts about ourselves as well. For example, I could ask you, because remember, this is a question, so you're going to ask someone about a fact. So I could ask you, are you American or British? Are you? Are you American or British? Now, another fact would be your job. So I could ask you, are you a software engineer? Now, I could also ask you a fact about your physical description, and I could ask you, for example, are you tall? Assuming we're chatting and I can't see you, so I don't know if you're tall or not, and I could ask, are you tall? Now let's take a look at the sentence structure. Because using the verb to be in question form, we use something called inversion. So we take our subject and our verb, which would be the structure for a positive sentence, and we invert them, which means we switch them. So our sentence structure for questions using the verb to be in the present simple is verb plus subject plus object. So we know our verb is the verb to be, are, and we know our subject is you because we're only talking about are, so our subject and our verb need to conjugate. Are you? And then I just need my object, the question, the rest of the sentence. Are you tall? Now keep that sentence structure in mind while we take a look at do you. Do you is also a question form in the present simple. The difference is do is an auxiliary verb, which means do doesn't have any meaning in that word. It's only there grammatically. So to have meaning in the sentence, we need a main verb. Do is the auxiliary verb, and we still need a main verb. Now, in the present simple, I'm going to ask you about yourself or about your routine. So, for example, I could ask, do you live in London? So, of course, here, live is our main verb. But I need my auxiliary verb do. Do you live in London? I can't just do inversion with my subject and verb. If I did that, it would be live you in London? Live you in London? And we know that isn't grammatically correct for English sentence structure. So we need our auxiliary verb do. And do is conjugated with our subject you. Do you live in London? Another question. Do you have a dog? So here, have is our main verb, but I can't say, have you a dog? So I need, do you have a dog? I need my auxiliary verb, do. So compare our two sentence structures, because here our sentence structure is auxiliary verb, subject, main verb. Auxiliary verb is do because our subject is you, and do conjugates with the subject you. Do you, and now we need a main verb, but the form of this is the base verb, which means it's the infinitive without to. So to live, we get rid of to, and we have live. Do you live? And then the rest of the sentence, the object. So with are you, our sentence structure was verb, subject, object. Do you, our sentence structure is auxiliary verb, do, subject, main verb, which is the base verb, and then the object. They're both used in question form with the present simple. And this is something that you absolutely must know to understand basic English sentence structure. So now it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 2 questions in the comments below, one with do you and one with are you. Amazing job. Now let's look at the difference between ever and never. You can think of ever as at least once, or one or more times. That's ever. Now, never, you can think of this as 0 times. Never, 0 times, not once. Ever and never are commonly used in the present perfect, especially in question form. So let's take a question in the present perfect. Have you been to Banff? Have you been to Banff? Now, in the present perfect, it's extremely common. In fact, it even sounds more natural to me to use the word ever. Have you ever been to Banff? Now, we add ever to present perfect questions because they're asking about life experience. And remember, it means at least once. So if you've been to Banff at least once or more in your life, then you can answer yes to the question. If you've been to Banff 0 times, then you'll say no. I've never been to Banff. So notice ever, we use it in the question form, but we don't use it in the positive answer. As a positive answer, I would just say, yeah, I've been to Banff once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and I give my answer. So let me ask you a question in the present perfect. Have you ever been skydiving? So, have you ever been skydiving? You can put your answer in the comments below, and also why don't you ask us a have you ever question and make it a fun and interesting question. Put that in the comments below. Now, although ever and never are very commonly used in the present perfect, we can also use them in the present simple. Never is very commonly used in the present simple. So remember, it means 0 times. And in the present simple, we're asking about routine actions. So we're asking about the frequency of actions you do. So it would be very common to say never for certain actions. For example, I could say, I never work out at night. I never work out at night. So this is not part of my daily routine. It takes place 0 times in my daily routine. We can use ever in question form in the present simple, although it's much less common than it is in the present perfect. But I could ask you, do you ever work out at night? Now, in this case, I'm asking you about the frequency of this action in your daily routine. So as a reply, you're just going to use an adverb of frequency and say, oh, I sometimes work out, I usually work out, I frequently work out, I rarely work out, and you're going to give me your answer. Remember, if it's 0 times, then you use never. I never work out at night. So what about you? Do you ever work out at night? You can put your answer in the comments below, and at the same time, why don't you ask your fellow students a question using do you ever? So remember, this is a present simple question. You're asking about the frequency of that action in their daily routine. So now you know the difference between ever and never, and remember to do all the practice in the comments below. This is our last section. Now let's look at the difference between for or since. I hear so many mistakes with these 2 words, and as we go through this lesson, you'll complete quizzes to make sure you really understand how to use for and since. Now, there's a specific time that you need to choose either for or since. They're not interchangeable, and it will make your sentence grammatically incorrect if you're using the wrong one. So first, let's talk about for. We use for duration, okay? So you can think of it as a time that has a start and an end, a duration of time. For example, for 20 minutes, for 3 weeks, for 7 months, or how about for 12 years? Now, we use since with a specific time. So you can think of it as a precise moment in time. For example, 9 a.m. last Monday, June 3rd, 2014. So that's the first thing you need to know to use these correctly. For is a duration of time and since is a specific time. Now let's talk about the verb tenses that you need for each. So here's a little quiz for you. I'm going to show you some sentences using for in different verb tenses. And I want you to tell me which ones are correct and which ones are incorrect. And keep in mind, we're talking about the verb tense specifically. So that's what you need to look at. So I'll show you the example sentences now. So which ones are correct and which ones are incorrect? Let us know in the comments. Well, I hate to break it to you, but this was a trick question because they're all correct. And the point is that for can be used with many different verb tenses. It's quite diverse in that way. Now, let's do the same thing, but this time we'll do it with since. So again, the time references are all correct. I'm using them all with specific time, but let's take a look at the verb tenses. So I'll show you the sentences and I want you to let us know which ones are correct and incorrect. So how'd you do with this one? How about in the comments, let us know which ones are correct, okay? Put it in the comments. Now this one wasn't a trick question because since is a lot more limited. So here are our example sentences. The only correct ones were number 1 and number 3. You can use since with the present perfect and the present perfect continuous. The reason why is because since we use this for an action that started in the past but continues until now, and we actually don't know when that action is going to end. But it's important, it started in the past, continues till now, and is still in progress. That's when we can use since. All right, so now you know that for is used for a duration of time and it's very diverse. You can use it with many different verb tenses. You know that since we need a specific time and you can use it with the present perfect and the present perfect continuous. Now let me show you a sentence that I see almost every day and it's wrong. And the sentence is, I've been learning English since 2 years. All right, this sentence is wrong. Now, I want you to take this sentence and make it a correct sentence. You're going to need to change either the for or since or the time reference, okay? So make your change and put the correct sentence in the comments below. And also, I want you to practice your own sentence. So leave a comment and use a sentence with for and a sentence with since. Amazing job. Now let's move on to more intermediate, more B1 grammar concepts. And again, these are mistakes that I see even advanced students make. Let's get started. First, let's talk about the difference between been and being. Both of these are simply different forms of the verb to be. So been is the past participle and being is the present participle. Now, when you use one or the other simply depends on the verb tense that the sentence requires. And how do you know which verb tense the sentence requires? Well, you need to look at your time reference and understand where you are on a timeline, and if you're talking about the past, the present, or the future, and how those actions interact with one another, okay? So we use been in the present perfect verb tense. For example, how have you been? The question, how have you been? This is in the present perfect. And then your answer could also be in the present perfect. I've been busy. I have, as a contraction, I've been busy. So your key here to know when to use been or being is that been is used with the auxiliary verb have. But remember that have can be conjugated as has with he or she. So it would be she has been busy. I have been busy. So when you see the verb have or has, you know your sentence needs been. And that's the present perfect verb tense. Now, another time we use been is in the past perfect. So, for example, I had been there. I had been there. Here, your key is that been is used with had. So had is just the past form of the verb have. So again, you can just memorize when you see have, even if it's in a different conjugation or in the past, you need been. Being, on the other hand, is used with completely different verb tenses. Being is a present participle, so it's used in the continuous form. It's the verb in ing. In that sense, it's used in the present continuous. I could say, she's being difficult. She's being difficult. So here, your key is that being is used with the auxiliary verb to be. She is a form of the verb to be. It would be you are being difficult. Are is an auxiliary of the verb to be. So when you have the verb to be, you know you need being. We also use being in the past continuous. I could say she was being difficult or they were being difficult. So again, we're using the auxiliary verb to be, but it's just conjugated in the past as was or were. So your clue for being is when it's used with the verb to be in a present form conjugated with the subject or in the past form, which is either was or were. Now, being can also be used as a gerund verb. So that's the verb in ing, but is actually being used as the subject of a sentence. So, simply put, I can start my sentence with a gerund verb. And this is to make a general statement that applies to a general situation. So I could say, being difficult is not a good personality trait. Okay, it's just a statement that applies most of the time. Being difficult is not a good personality trait. So notice my sentence starts with the verb being because that's the gerund verb. So that's a more advanced way to use the verb being. So that's to summarize when you're going to use been or being. Remember that they're just different forms of the verb to be, and when you use them depends on the verb tense that the sentence requires, and the sentence requires a specific verb tense depending on the time reference and if you're in the past, present, or future. So now this is a lot of information. The best way to truly understand this information is to practice it. So you have a lot of work to do. I want you to leave 5 sentences in the comments. 1 with the present perfect, past perfect, present continuous, past continuous, and bonus points if you can get a gerund statement. Remember, all of these are using been or being. So get to work. You're going to have to review this lesson again because there's a lot of information in here. So just take it slow. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about the difference between been to and been in. So here are 2 example sentences. I've been to Paris 5 times. I've been in Paris for 5 weeks. What's the difference between these sentences? Well, let's talk about the first one. I've been to Paris 5 times. Notice that this sentence is in the present perfect. The structure of the present perfect is subject, have or has conjugated with the subject, the participle form of the verb. The verb here is the verb to be. So the past participle of the verb to be is been. We use been with all the subjects. And then the rest of your sentence. I've been to Paris 5 times. So why is this sentence in the present perfect? Well, it's because we use the present perfect for life experience. And we use it for life experience because our life is an ongoing timeline. And because of that, we're talking about actions that started in the past, such as traveling to Paris, but it's an unfinished timeline. So I can continue doing this action in the future. So I've been to Paris 5 times until now, and it's possible for me to go to Paris again. So maybe next year I'll say I've been to Paris 6 times. Because of that, the sentence is in the present perfect. When we use the present perfect with the verb to be, to as our preposition, and a location, such as I've been to Paris, Paris is the location, 5 times. So we do this to talk about places we've traveled or places we haven't traveled, because things we haven't done is also part of our life experience. So we can put things we haven't done in the present perfect as well. So for example, I could say I've been to Thailand once, but I haven't been to Myanmar. Now let's compare this to I've been in Paris for 5 weeks. Now here, this sentence is also in the present perfect, but the reason why this sentence is in the present perfect is different. We're not talking about life experience per se, we're talking about an action that started in the past and continues until now. So notice I said I've been in Paris for 5 weeks. So what this means is 5 weeks ago, I arrived in Paris. That action started in the past. But here's the important thing. I'm in Paris right now. If I say I've been in Paris for 5 weeks, I'm currently in Paris. Okay? That's the very important thing to keep in mind. So when we use the present perfect with the verb to be, the preposition in, and then a location, this is used to talk about where we are now, and that action started in the past, but it continues until now. For example, I could say, my flight was canceled, so I've been in Texas for 3 days. So right now, I'm in Texas. Maybe I'm not supposed to be in Texas. I'm supposed to be in Paris, but my flight was canceled, so I'm stuck in Texas. The action started in the past 3 days ago, and it continues until now. I've been in Texas for 3 days. So now you know how to use the present perfect with the verb to be, I've been to, or I've been in, and a location. So it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 2 examples, and why not try different subjects so you can practice conjugating your verb have or has with your subject. So put those in the comments below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about the difference between has gone and was gone. So first you need to see these in sentences to understand the full context. She's already gone home. Notice that contraction, she's. In this case, the S represents has. She has already gone home. She's already gone home. Or I could say, she was gone when I got home. So what's the difference between these two? Well, they're different verb tenses. Has gone is the present perfect verb tense. We form the present perfect with the subject, has or have, depending on the subject, and the third form of the verb, the past participle. So in our sentence, she's already gone home, our main verb in this sentence is the verb to go. And then we're taking that verb go and we're conjugating it in the present perfect. Because our subject is she, we need has as our auxiliary verb. And then I take my verb go and I put it in the third form, the past participle, and that's gone. Go, went, gone. She's already gone home. And this sentence is in the present perfect because it's a completed past action, but it has a present consequence. Now let's talk about was gone. This sentence structure is to be gone. So in this case, gone is being used as an adjective, and our main verb is be. Now because of that, we need to conjugate our main verb in the past, present, or future. And in this case, was is the past simple conjugation of the verb to be. And it's the past simple with the subject she. She was gone when I got home. In terms of meaning, when I say she was gone when I got home, all I'm saying is that she's no longer here now. So now you can see we have 2 different sentence structures. In the first one, we have the verb to go conjugated in the present perfect. In the second one, we have the sentence structure to be gone conjugated in the past simple. Now you might be wondering, when do we use to go and when do we use to be gone? Well, we use the verb to go when we're talking about movement, and we use the verb to be gone simply to mean no longer here. So we want to emphasize the absence of something or someone, not necessarily their movement. Another difference is that to go, talking about movement, this is used in an everyday context, is the most commonly used, the most natural. When we use to be gone, talking about the absence, this is used more in a narrative. So when perhaps you're telling a story, it could be a story to a friend, it could be in a book, it could be in a movie, in a newspaper article, for example, but you would expect to hear that sentence structure more in a narrative form. So now you know the difference between has gone and was gone. So it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 2 examples, one with has gone and one with was gone, in the comments below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about how to use the sentence structure having plus past participle. The past participle is your third form of the verb. Now, we use this structure when the action is complete. So whatever the action is, if the structure having plus past participle is used, you know that the person has done that action. Now, as for sentence structure, this is commonly used to start a sentence. So in that case, notice your sentence starts with the verb having. It doesn't start with a subject. It starts with having. And it's just implied that whoever is talking is the subject. So for example, one of the most common ways to use this is having said that. Having said that. So said, of course, is the third form of the verb say. Having said that. Now, when somebody uses this expression, they're letting you know that they're going to reference something that they've previously said. In this expression, having said that, the that is the words that the person previously said. Now, normally they just said it. It was what they just said. It is possible that it could be something they said a while ago, but generally it's they just said it. So for example, you could be in a meeting and your boss is praising everyone, saying, awesome job, guys. We really did a great job this week. Our sales are up, our performance is up, and those are the words. Now, he wants to transition, and he could say, having said that, so he's referencing the words he just said. Remember, the words he just said were positive, okay? So you could say, having said that, we still have a lot of work to do. So he's giving you all this praise, but he wants you to keep in mind that there's still work to do. So he's balancing it out. Having said that, we still have a lot of work to do. So that's a very common way to use this expression. But you don't have to only use it with the verb say. You can use this with pretty much any verb. But remember, it's to show that the action is complete. Let's say my friend and I are talking about marathons, and my friend wants to run a marathon and is talking about training for this marathon. Now I could say, having run a marathon. Having run a marathon, I can give you some tips. So I'm letting my friend know that this action of running a marathon is complete for me. I've done it. I've run a marathon. Having run a marathon, I can give you some tips. So we commonly use this just to show the experiences that we've had that are complete for us in order to educate, or in order to inform, or maybe even in order to show sympathy or empathy for someone, to show that you understand their situation because you've experienced it as well. Now, I talked about how most commonly it's used to start a sentence. This isn't the only location. You can use it as the second part of a sentence, and it's going to follow a comma. So for example, I could say, New York City is known for its busy streets, and having lived there, I can confirm that this is true. So notice, it starts the next part of a sentence after a comma, and I'm just using and to show that connection between the two ideas. Of course, I can divide these into two separate sentences and say, New York City is known for its busy streets, period. Having lived there, I can confirm that is true. So the choice is yours. It doesn't really matter. It probably just depends on the sentence. But you will see this most commonly at the start of a sentence. And the important thing to remember is that the action is complete. So now you know how to use this advanced sentence structure. Of course, it's your turn to practice, so I want you to leave 3 different examples using 3 different verbs, so you also really get comfortable with the past participle because you need the third form of the verb, which is the least common verb used. So I want you to get comfortable with that as well. So leave 3 different examples in the comments below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about the different ways you can use the verb appreciate.
So our first sentence structure that we can use is you can appreciate plus a noun. So this is the sentence structure. You would have obviously subject and then your verb appreciate conjugated with your subject, time, reference, and subject as well. And then followed by the word appreciate, you have a noun. A noun is either a something or a someone. So you can say, I appreciate your time. So most likely that's what we need to do here is just get rid of this word devoting and just put, I appreciate something. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your help. You can also just appreciate someone. I appreciate you. Or you can use it in the negative. My boss doesn't appreciate everything I do for this company. So this is probably the most common sentence structure with appreciate. Another sentence structure when you want to talk about someone else is what we needed here is a someone else. So with that, most likely you're going to use appreciate plus that and then a clause. Now, a clause, you need a subject, a verb, and a lot of the times an object, but at least you need a subject and a verb. So you can say, I appreciate that you spent your weekend helping me move. Now, this really means the same thing as I appreciated your help this weekend. Or we can say I appreciate now, even though you helped the weekend and it's already done, or it could be a future as well. I appreciate your help this weekend. So another sentence structure is we're just going to add the 2 words, the fact. When we do this, the meaning does not change between this one. I appreciate that and clause. When we add the fact, to me, it sounds more emphasized, making it a little bit more dramatic, stronger. I appreciate the fact that you spent your weekend helping me move. Again, just emphasizing it. Again, we can just simply say, I appreciate something, your help this weekend. Now, this is a sentence structure that most likely many students aren't using or they're not using correctly. And they're not using it correctly because of what happens after the WH. So we have appreciate, then WH, which is who, what, when, why, where, or how. We consider how a WH. And then we still need a clause. So you have a subject, verb, an object. So we don't have a verb beside the WH. We have a subject, okay? So you could say, I appreciate who they are as people. So who is our WH, and then we have a clause. They are, subject, verb. Now, honestly, this really just means I appreciate them. It's just another way of saying it, really. And that's what I want you to understand from this, is that there are many different ways in English to say the same thing. And they're all correct. They're just simply different grammatical structures. And when you feel really confident with your English, it's because you're able to use different structures and understand how to use them correctly, and understand when the meaning changes and when the meaning doesn't change as well. You could say, I appreciate everyone who sent in a question or questions, who sent in a question. I appreciate what you're trying to say. I appreciate what you do for this company. I appreciate when you submit your questions. I appreciate where you're trying to take this company. Or I appreciate why you feel you deserve a promotion. Now, how? A lot of times when we use how, you're going to see much. I appreciate how much you do for this company. So this is a more advanced sentence structure, but I really encourage you to get comfortable with it. But make sure you pay attention that the WH plus a subject. A final sentence structure that you can use is appreciate, and then a pronoun, and then a gerund. This is also a more advanced structure. You can say, I appreciate you helping me today. So here, this is exactly the same as I appreciate your help today, or I appreciate the fact that you helped me today. I appreciate how much you helped me today. Ultimately, they're saying the same thing. They're just really different sentence structures.
Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about the difference between the verbs wonder and wondering. What's the difference between I wonder, I'm wondering, and I was wondering? Let's look at all three in an example sentence. I wonder what time the store opens. I'm wondering what time the store opens. I was wondering what time the store opens. What's the difference between all three? Ultimately, there's a very subtle difference, and you can use any one of the three and it will be grammatically correct, it will sound natural, and there'll be a very minor difference in meaning. The difference is quite insignificant, so don't overthink this. If the explanation is too complicated for you, just know that any one will do the trick. Now let's look at the difference between them a little bit more. Well, you've probably noticed that the verb tense is different. Now, that's really it. The verb tense is different, but ultimately the meaning is the same. So of course, I wonder what time the store opens. What verb tense is this? The present simple. We use the verb wonder in the present simple mainly when it's an in general situation. So the fact that we're wondering isn't really limited to this moment in time. It's just taking place in general. And we also use I wonder more when we're thinking out loud. I wonder what I should have for lunch today. But as we're thinking out loud, we don't always want an answer or expect an answer. So let's imagine that you're my coworker and you're standing right beside me. We're in the kitchen at work and I say out loud, I wonder what I should have for lunch today. I don't necessarily want you to reply. I'm just thinking out loud. But if you, as my coworker, if you did reply and you suggested something I should have for lunch, I wouldn't be offended by it. I would gladly accept it. But the purpose of saying it isn't to get a reply. It's more just thinking out loud. I'm wondering is, of course, in the present continuous. The present continuous is used for actions taking place right now. So in this case, when I use the present continuous, I'm putting emphasis on the fact that I'm wondering right now. This is taking place right now. We generally use I'm wondering in the present continuous to ask an indirect question. For example, I might say, I'm wondering if you could help me move tonight. I'm wondering if you could help me move tonight. Now, it's an indirect question because I'm not saying directly, can you help me move tonight, which would be a direct question. It's an indirect question. But in this case, I do expect you to reply back and give me an answer. I was wondering is the past continuous. In this case, we're putting emphasis on the fact that the action, I was wondering, the action of wondering took place in the past. But here's what you need to know. Even though the action of wondering happened in the past, I can still ask you an indirect question now. I was wondering if you can help me move tonight. So in this case, there really is no difference in meaning between the present continuous and the past continuous. I can still use it to ask an indirect question now. It's just whether I was contemplating, wondering that now or in the past. So that's the very subtle difference in meaning, but remember what I said at the beginning, that ultimately all three can be used to make a statement in the present, even though they use completely different verb tenses. So the grammar is different, and there is a subtle difference in meaning. However, ultimately all three are acceptable forms. So now it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 3 different examples using the present simple, present continuous, and past continuous of the verb wonder. So leave those in the comments below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about how to use the advanced sentence structure, not only X, but also Y. We use the expression not only X, but also Y to identify 2 characteristics, traits, or points. This is a formal expression. You can use it in a business presentation or in a formal report or an academic essay. It will help you sound very advanced. Now, we have X and Y. The thing to keep in mind is that X and Y are both going to be positive points or they're both going to be negative points. But we're not making a contrast with X and Y, so they have to match. For example, I could say, Paul's not only intelligent, but also funny. So here our X and Y is intelligent and funny. Now notice in the second part of our sentence, but also funny, notice how I didn't repeat the subject and verb. I didn't repeat but he is also funny. That subject and verb is going to apply for both parts of the sentence. So if you say it in part 1, you don't have to repeat it in part 2 if it's the exact same subject and verb. Now we use this structure, not only X, but also Y, to add emphasis to our 2 points. Because let's compare this to just a very simple statement, and I could say, Paul's intelligent and funny. Paul's intelligent and funny. Both of these expressions have the exact same meaning. I would say just using not only, but also, I'm emphasizing those 2 traits and characteristics. Plus, it sounds a lot more advanced. Now, in this example, both of our traits are positive. Intelligent is positive and funny is positive. But I could also use an example where both the traits are negative. For example, I could say, Petra's not only lazy, but also irresponsible. So notice, both my traits, my X and Y, they match. They're both negative. Let's look at another example. I improved not only my speaking, but also my writing. Now notice here, I improved. My verb is in the past. If this was an action in progress, I could say I'm improving. I'm improving not only, but also. Now, notice in the second part, I still don't repeat the subject and the verb because it's the same for the first part and the second part, so it's not necessary. Now let's look at one more example where I'm going to change the structure just a little bit. I could say, not only does she speak German, she also speaks Dutch. Now, notice I'm beginning with not only. In this specific case, when I begin with not only, I have to include do as an auxiliary verb. And of course, do is going to be conjugated in the present simple or the past simple or whatever time reference you have. So here, not only does she speak German, but of course, in a normal sentence, I would simply say she speaks German. I wouldn't use the auxiliary verb do. I'm using it in this case only because I'm starting with not only. You can think of this just as a grammar rule that you need to apply to this specific structure when you begin with not only. Not only does she speak German, she also speaks Dutch. Now notice in the second part, I'm not repeating the auxiliary verb does. It's not necessary. This is a little more of an advanced structure. If it's too advanced for you, then you don't need it because you can simply say she speaks not only German, but also Dutch. The meaning is exactly the same. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to take it a little more advanced as well. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about the difference between over and during. So what's the difference between saying, we went to the beach over the weekend? We went to the beach during the weekend. Now in this context, over and during have the exact same meaning. However, we only use them in the same way in very specific expressions. This isn't something we do all the time. You can use over or during, and there's no difference when you're talking about the weekend, holidays, seasons, vacation, or meals. For example, you could say, let's discuss this over lunch. Let's discuss this during lunch. Lunch is a meal. And remember, I said we can use over or during for meals. Now, generally, native speakers will use over or during without any difference, but there is a subtle difference in meaning. And that's when we use over, it sounds like it's the entire time, from start to finish. So if I say, let's talk about this over lunch, to me, it sounds like the entire lunch, from start to finish, we'll be discussing the project. So let's discuss the project over lunch. That's the only thing we're doing. But if I say, let's discuss the project during lunch, to me that sounds like at one specific point during lunch. It could be at the beginning of lunch, it could be at the middle of lunch, it could be at the end of lunch. But at one specific point, we'll discuss the project. But we'll do other things as well. So that's the difference. although it's subtle, and most native speakers will just use one or the other without thinking about that difference. Now, just remember that we only use over and during interchangeably in that very specific context of weekends, holidays, vacation, meal, and seasons. Outside of those specific categories, they have different meanings and they're not interchangeable. So for example, I have to say, nobody talked during the presentation. I can't say nobody talked over the presentation. That doesn't sound right because the presentation is not one of the categories I gave you. Or for example, the presentation went for over 3 hours. Now in this case, over means more than. It went for more than 3 hours. It went for over 3 hours. So I can't change it to during, and I can't say the presentation went for during 3 hours. That doesn't work. So most of the time they don't have the same meaning. Again, just remember those categories: the weekend, holidays, vacation, seasons, and meals. You can use either one. I cleaned the garage over the weekend. I cleaned the garage during the weekend. So now it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 2 examples, both using over and during. So make sure you choose one of those categories and leave 2 examples in the comments below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about the difference between the past simple and the present perfect. And specifically, we're looking at the 2 sentences, I already ate and I've already eaten. Now, of course, you need to notice the structure. So you need to know how to form the past simple and the present perfect. So just keep that in mind. And let's talk about the meaning of these 2. So we use the past simple with a completed past action, right? This action is complete. I already ate. That is a finished, completed action in the past. Now, let's talk about the present perfect. Here's what you need to keep in mind. The present perfect has many different uses depending on the context. In this lesson, we're specifically talking about comparing these 2 sentences. So in this specific context, the present perfect can be used for a past action with a present consequence, okay? There are other ways we use the present perfect. We're not going to discuss those. We're specifically talking about this one meaning, a past action with a present consequence. I've already eaten. So as you can see just from their definitions, that they can both be used with a completed past action. The difference is the present perfect, present. There's a connection to the present, okay? So keep that as your memory aid. Present perfect, present, connection to the present. With the past simple, that connection to the present isn't there. One other thing you need to keep in mind is that a native English speaker is not a grammar expert. A native English speaker is going to use these 2 sentences in this specific context. They're going to use these 2 sentences interchangeably, and there's not going to be a difference in meaning. So when a native speaker says, I already ate, or I've already eaten, there's no difference at all. If you ask them, why did you say this one and not this one? they're not going to know because they don't study grammar, okay? And they're both acceptable, so just keep that in mind. A native speaker is going to use them interchangeably with no difference in meaning. But let's talk about that subtle difference in meaning when we say that the present perfect can be used with a past action that has a present consequence. What does that mean, a present consequence? So let's just think about that. I already ate. In the past simple, just remember, completed, past action. It's done, it's over. I already ate. Now, when I say I've already eaten, there's some sort of connection to the present. So you can always think of it in your head as I've already eaten, so now, okay? I've already eaten, so now, because connection to the present, I've already eaten, so now I'm not hungry. So now, I don't want a piece of cake. So now, I don't want to go to that restaurant with you, okay? I've already eaten. But keep in mind that so now, we don't verbalize it. We don't say it out loud. It's just implied in the context, okay? So let's take a look at a few more examples. I could say, I talked to my boss. Just a completed past action. Or I could say, I've talked to my boss. So what's the connection to the present? Maybe I've talked to my boss, so now I'm going to leave. Maybe that's just the connection to the present. It could be anything. Again, we don't verbalize that. It's just implied. How about this one? I checked the mail. Just completed past action. I checked the mail. Or I've checked the mail in the present perfect. I've checked the mail. What's the connection to the present? I've checked the mail, so you don't have to. That could be the connection to the present. One more example. I booked the hotel. Completed past action. Or I could say, I've booked the hotel in the present perfect. I've booked the hotel, so now we're going on vacation. Maybe that's the connection to the present. So now I'm excited. Remember, we don't specifically say it, it's just implied. And also, in all of these examples, in this specific context, a native English speaker is going to use them interchangeably without a difference in meaning. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Now let's talk about how you can correctly use three very common verbs: recommend, suggest, and advise. So let's say you're at a restaurant, you're looking through the menu, and then you ask your server, what would you recommend me? Or you're discussing a problem with your boss and you ask, what would you suggest me? What do you think about these sentences? Are these sentences grammatically correct or incorrect? What do you think? Well, these sentences are wrong. You can't say, what would you recommend me, suggest me, yet I hear it every single day. In fact, I hear this so much from students that it's starting to sound normal just because I hear it every single day, and I have to remember that's not correct. And the reason why this is incorrect is because the sentence structure is incorrect. Following the verb recommend, suggest, we do not want an object pronoun. Me is an object pronoun. The good news is there's a very easy way to fix this. Just don't say me. If you're at a restaurant, say, what would you recommend? If you're talking to your boss, say, what do you suggest? That's all you need to do, because grammatically, from a sentence structure, we don't want the object pronoun. Now let's take a look at this example I saw on Youglish. The example is, I recommend you find 150 books. Now this is where students get confused, Because they see you. I recommend you. So why can't I say, what would you recommend me? Because this you is not an object pronoun. It's tricky because you is both the subject pronoun, I, you, he, she, it, we, they, and you is also the object pronoun, me, you, him, her. But in this sentence, the you is a subject pronoun. Now you'll notice here, we have our verb recommend, and then following the verb recommend, we have a clause. A clause is a subject, a verb, and an object. I recommend you is the subject. Find is the verb. 150 books is the object. Now, in written English, you can use that to connect recommend and the clause. I recommend that. I suggest that. It's optional, and in written English, it's most commonly included, but in spoken English, it's most commonly left out. So based on what I just said, what do you think about this sentence? The doctor suggested me to lose weight. Is this sentence correct or incorrect? What do you think? The doctor suggested me to lose weight. It's wrong. You can't say this because me is an object pronoun and we do have a verb, but the verb isn't even conjugated with anything. It's just in the infinitive form. So remember, we need recommend, suggest, plus a clause. A clause is a subject, a verb, and an object. So how can we fix this sentence? We can say, the doctor recommended that I lose weight. I is our subject. Lose is our verb. Notice the verb is conjugated with the subject, and our object is weight. Remember, that is optional. Most likely, I'll keep it in with written English and I'll leave it out with spoken English. The doctor recommended I lose weight. Another quiz for you. What do you think about this sentence? Would you recommend me for the promotion? Would you recommend me for the promotion? What do you think? Is this good or bad? This is good. Don't be confused. I'm going to make this very clear for you. Would you recommend me for the promotion? In this sentence, I am not receiving the recommendation. I am the recommendation because you can recommend something. For example, I recommend the duck. If you're at a restaurant and you're looking for different items, there's chicken, fish, and duck. I recommend the duck. That's a something. So in this case, I am the recommendation. I'm the recommendation for the promotion. Think of it like this. Your boss asks you, who should we recommend for the promotion? Who should we recommend? We should recommend Jennifer. Of course, why wouldn't you? We should recommend Jennifer. I am the recommendation. So in my question, remember, I asked my colleague, would you recommend me for the promotion? This is not the same as saying, what would you recommend me? Because that is incorrect. In that case, I'm receiving the recommendation. I am not the recommendation. I'm receiving it. And then you don't want an object pronoun, and you simply say, what would you recommend? I recommend the duck. Who would you recommend? I recommend Jennifer. There's another sentence structure you need to know, and that's recommend, suggest, plus gerund. Gerund is your verb in ing. For example, I recommend drinking 8 glasses of water a day. I recommend ordering the duck. Now let's talk about advise. You can say he advised signing the contract. So what do you notice here? What's the sentence structure? What do we have right here? Well, of course, we have advise plus gerund. So this is the same thing we can do with recommend or suggest. And you can also say, he advised that I sign the contract. So what do you notice about this sentence structure? Well, it's advise plus that, which is optional. And then we have our clause, subject, verb, and then our object. So this is also the exact same sentence structure you can use with recommend or suggest. Now, what about this sentence? He advised me to sign the contract. Advised me. He advised me. What do you think? Is this correct or incorrect? Well, this is correct. So with this specific verb, advise, you can have a pronoun. You can advise someone. But notice what comes next. We have our infinitive, to plus base verb. He advised me. He advised him. He advised her. He advised you to sign, to go, to eat, to drink. Any infinitive. And then our object, the contract. So advise is more flexible. You can use it with the gerund, the clause, and you can even say advise me. So now let's talk about explain, because I hear this every single day. Teacher, can you explain me how to use the present perfect? What do you think about that? Can you explain me? Is that correct or incorrect? Well, you should know this by now. It's wrong. You don't explain someone. You explain to someone. This is why I saved explain for the end, but I really wanted you to learn it because it's the same thing. We don't want an object pronoun. Explain me? No. Explain to me. That's all you need to do. You need to add that preposition to because you explain to someone. Now, most commonly, we use the structure explain something to someone. Can you explain the present perfect to me? Now, if it's obvious that you're the one receiving the explanation, you don't even have to say it. You don't need to say to me, to him, to us, to them. If it's obvious, you can just say, can you explain the present perfect? That's fine. But you don't want to say, can you explain me? So please take the time to study and learn what I taught you in this video because you will not sound fluent. You will not sound natural. You will not pass your IELTS or your language exam if you say, recommend me, explain me. That's a beginner mistake, but I hear all my students, advanced students from every background use that sentence structure. So take the time, watch this video multiple times to really understand the sentence structure and then leave some examples in the comments below because you really need to practice it the correct way and get lots of repetitions with the correct form. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. You're doing amazing. Now let's move on to the final section where we're going to discuss advanced grammar concepts. Let's get started. First, let's talk about the difference between all of the, and all the. So what's the difference between all students struggle with their speaking skills? All of the students or all the students struggle with their English speaking skills? Well, first you need to know the difference between a plural noun without an article and a plural noun with an article. So what's the difference between students and the students? This is the first thing you need to know. When we have a plural noun with no article in front of it, it's a general plural noun. We're talking about students in general. Any student, any subject, any age, any background, any students at all. So students. When we put the article the in front of a plural noun, students, now we're limiting it to a specific group of students. The students in my class. The students I work with. The students in university. So it's not general. We're limiting it. So that's the difference between all students and all of the students, or all students and all the students. All students is general, the students is specific. Now, of course, that leaves us with the question, what's the difference between all of the students and all the students? So why in one case we use the preposition of and in the other we don't? The answer is simple. In spoken English, we just leave out the word of because it's only there for grammar and it's not there for meaning. And this is just an acceptable thing that we do with the structure all, of, the, and a plural noun. You can think of as optional, and when we remove it, this is generally done in spoken English, and there is no difference between the two. However, to be safe and to make sure you're always grammatical, I recommend using of because it's always correct. All of the students. And I'm recommending that because there is an exception and we must use of followed by a pronoun. It's incorrect to say all us went to the party. That's incorrect because us is a pronoun. And because of that, I must say all of us went to the party. I can't say all us went to the party. That's incorrect. That's just an exception we use with pronouns. Students is not a pronoun. So I can say all of the students went to the party or all the students went to the party. In that case, both of them are correct and I can get rid of. So if you want, you can use the casual form that most native speakers use and get rid of, except when it's followed by a pronoun, then you must use of. And again, to be safe, I recommend using the structure all, of, the, and plural noun. Remember, when we're talking about plural nouns in general, not a specific group, then we get rid of the, and I can say all students struggle with their speaking skills. So to summarize, all three are correct. So now it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 3 examples in the comments below, and remember, if you get rid of, you can't use a pronoun. So remember that. So leave your examples in the comments below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about although, even though, and though. All 3 of these are transition words. They're used to show contrast. So what does that mean? To show contrast, it means you're going to have two ideas, and the transition word, although, even though, or though, are going to connect those two ideas together. But those two ideas must have some sort of contrast in them. So you can think of one idea as more of a positive and the other idea as more of a negative. There has to be some sort of contrast. Now, what's the difference between although, even though, and though? The level of formality. That's it. Although is the most formal, even though slightly less formal, and though is the most casual. Now, in terms of sentence structure, there's one difference also with though, which I'll explain at the end, but otherwise, the only difference between them is the formality. Let me give you an example. Even though I'm busy, I enrolled in that course. So here, notice how there are two distinct ideas. I'm busy, I enrolled in a course. You can think of these ideas as being in contrast. They're opposite ideas because one might think if you're busy, you wouldn't have time to enroll in a course. So that's why we can use although, even though, or though to show that contrast and connect those ideas together. Now notice the placement here. Although, even though, or though can come at the very beginning of a sentence. You can say, even though I'm busy, although I'm busy, though I'm busy, I enrolled in that course. Now, another common placement is to have although, even though, or though before your second idea. So you can think of it in the middle of your sentence. So I can take that exact same sentence, but change the placement and say, I enrolled in that course even though I'm busy. Although I'm busy, though I'm busy. So it can come at the very beginning of the sentence or in the middle of the sentence before your second idea. And it doesn't matter which one you use. Both of them are interchangeable and they both sound professional and natural. Now remember at the beginning of the video, I said there's one sentence structure with though that's different. And that sentence structure is that you can use though at the end of your sentence. This can only be done with though. So we don't do this with although and we don't do this with even though. It can only be done with though. So I could say, I'm really busy. I enrolled in the course though, and I can add though at the very end. This makes it sound a lot more casual, a lot more conversational, and it's what you'll frequently hear native speakers use in conversation. Now, native speakers commonly use though at the end of the sentence when the second idea isn't identified, the contrast isn't identified, but it's obvious based on context. What do I mean by that? Well, let me show you a real world example. Here's something I wrote in the comment section of the YouTube video. And notice I said, great job practicing though. Great job practicing though. Now, I'll be honest, though is optional. I could just completely get rid of it and say, great job practicing. The only reason a native speaker includes though at the end of an idea is to imply that there's a contrast. So even though you don't see the contrast, it's there. So what is the contrast here? Well, the context is that this student tried a practice example and he made a mistake. So I corrected that mistake and I said, great job practicing though. So if I were to write this as our structure of idea one, idea two combined with our transition word, I could say, although you made a mistake, you did a great job. Or you did a great job even though you made a mistake. So notice that I can take that same meaning and just imply that the contrast is there by using though at the very end of a sentence and only having the one idea. This is probably an advanced use and you probably won't feel comfortable using it yourself right now, but a lot of students are confused when native speakers just throw in a though and say something like, thanks though. Thanks though, I'd love to though. So now you understand the only reason we're doing that is to show a contrast. So now you know how to use although, even though, and though. I'd like you to leave 3 example sentences, 1 using the transition word at the beginning, 1 using the transition word in the middle, and 1 using though at the end. Remember, for the final example, it has to be though because that's the only one we use at the end. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about even though and even if. First of all, you need to know that they don't have the same meaning. They're not used interchangeably. So they're both used in a very specific situation. So let's begin with even though. Even though is used when something is true, but it doesn't impact the action that you take or the decision that you make. For example, I could say, even though it's raining, I'm going for a walk. So remember, the something is true. So the something that comes immediately after even though is true. So if I look outside my window right now, it's raining. Even though it's raining. That's true. But remember, it doesn't impact my action or my decision. So in this case, it doesn't impact my decision to go for a walk. Even though it's raining, I'm going for a walk. Now, in terms of placement, this is flexible. We can switch the order of the 2 clauses. So I can start with the action. I'm going for a walk even though it's raining. Now let's compare this to even if. What you need to remember with even if is that this is a hypothetical situation. So that's the main difference because remember, even though 100% true. Even if it's a hypothetical situation, okay? So for example, I could say, even if it rains, I'm going for a walk. So when I look out my window, at this moment in time, it's not raining because I'm just talking about a hypothetical situation. But for me to say that, even if it rains, most likely it looks like there's dark clouds. It looks like it's going to rain. There must be a reason for me to talk about the rain if I use this expression. Even if it rains, I'm going for a walk. Now, it may rain. It may not rain. We don't know the outcome of that situation. But if it does rain, if it doesn't rain, it doesn't impact my decision or it doesn't impact the action. So that part of the expression is the same for both. In both cases, it doesn't impact your decision or your action or the outcome in general. But even though 100% true, even if it's hypothetical. So that's the main difference. To really understand this, you just need to practice them side by side so you can see how the meaning of your idea changes. So that's what I suggest you do right now. Take one example, but try one with even though and one with even if and see how it changes the meaning and the sentence structure as well. So put those in the comment section below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about as if and as though. Now, in terms of difference between the two, there is no difference, so you can use them interchangeably. They have the same meaning. With that said, as if is a lot more common. So if you had to choose between using one, I would recommend as if. The examples I give you are all going to use as if because it sounds way more natural to me and I don't really use as though in my speech. So I recommend using as if, but you can absolutely use as though and it has the same meaning. So as if and as though are conjunctions. We use them in two different ways. The first is when it's an unreal comparison. So the important thing to keep in mind here is this is an impossible situation. It's a hypothetical situation. So because of that, we're going to use the subjunctive verb tense. I could say he acted as if he were the CEO. So here in this sentence, he were the CEO. Notice were. That's the subjunctive verb tense because in a past simple sentence, I would simply say he was the CEO. But that means it was real. It's in the past simple, so it's over. The action is complete. But at a time in the past, in reality, he was the CEO. But in my example, he acted as if he were the CEO. This is an unreal comparison. I'm comparing him to the CEO, but he is not the CEO. Because of that, I'm using the past simple in the first part of the sentence. I'm using as if as the conjunction. And then after as if, I need a clause. So just a subject, a verb, and an object. But that verb should be in the past subjunctive. So just make sure that verb to be is in were for all the subjects. I could say, I acted as if I were the CEO. But because I used as if I were, you know that I'm not the CEO. It's an unreal comparison. Now, another common way we use as if and as though is for a situation that seems likely or seems possible. In this case, we're not using the subjunctive because there is a possibility that it can be real. So because of that, we're just going to use different verb tenses depending on the context and where we are on our timeline. So I could say, you look as if you haven't slept in days. So here, you haven't slept in days. That's in the present perfect because it started in the past and it continues until now. And I'm using as if to suggest that although this seems possible, it seems likely, I'm not 100% sure that it's true. So there is some doubt to the statement. You might reply back and say, no, actually, I've been sleeping fine. Now, in this use only, when we're using it for something that seems likely or possible, but we're not 100% true, native speakers commonly use like. You look like you haven't slept in days. And honestly, for me, it sounds a lot more natural to use like. I used as if because that's the purpose of this video, but in an everyday conversation with friends or coworkers, I would use like. So to summarize, as if and as though have the same meaning. They're both conjunctions. However, as if is a lot more common and I recommend using it to sound more natural. They're used for two different reasons. The first is an unreal comparison. You have to use the past simple and the past subjunctive verb tense. And the second time you can use this is when you're suggesting that something seems likely or possible, but you're not 100% sure. And in this case, you can use any verb tense depending on the context. And you can also substitute as if for like. So now you know how to use as if and as though, so it's your turn to practice. I want you to leave two examples, one the unreal comparison, and the second example for the seems likely or possible. So put those in the comment section below. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about how to use the sentence structure to be supposed to. We use this expression to talk about obligation or commitment. So when you use this, you're using it with something that you're required to do because of an obligation or commitment. Let me give you an example sentence. Tonight, I'm going to a little holiday party. So this morning I said to Kevin, I said, what time are we supposed to be there? What time are we supposed to be there? Now remember, it's about a commitment or an obligation. So because we agreed to go to this party, we said, yes, we will be there. We made a commitment to go to that party. So you don't have to use this expression just for big, major commitments. You can use it for minor things like just agreeing to go to a party. And of course, when we agree to go to that party, well, there's a start time to the party. So that's the requirement or the commitment for us. What time are we supposed to be there? Now let's talk about the sentence structure. So our sentence structure is to be, suppose, and then infinitive. So the to be supposed to, that to belongs to the infinitive verb. Now here's what you need to keep in mind. This is a to be expression. That means to be is our main verb. It's the verb that's conjugated according to the subject and according to the time reference. Suppose is always in an ed form, okay? Always. It doesn't change. And we always use the infinitive following suppose. So in my sentence, what time are we supposed to be there? Now, are is being conjugated with our subject, we, right? And for verb tense, it's in the present simple, okay? The verb to be is being conjugated in the present simple. Now, we use the present simple form in this expression to talk about a future event. That's what you need to keep in mind. So the party I'm going to is tonight. It's in the future, but I'm putting my verb to be in the present simple. Let me give you another example. I could say, I'm supposed to call my uncle tomorrow. The verb to be is being conjugated with the subject, I am, I'm, and it's in the present simple, even though the time reference is the future, tomorrow. I'm supposed to call is our infinitive. I'm supposed to call my uncle tomorrow. That means that I have a commitment or an obligation to call my uncle. I told him or I told somebody else that yes, I'll call him tomorrow. I'm supposed to call my uncle tomorrow. So just remember, for a future commitment, we use our expression in the present simple, and it's the verb to be that's being conjugated with our subject and in the present simple. Now, also keep in mind that whether or not I actually call my uncle tomorrow is not known, okay? It's a future event. Will I do it? Who knows? That's not really the point. The point of this expression isn't to talk about whether or not that action actually happens. The point is just to express an obligation or a commitment. I'm supposed to call my uncle tomorrow. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I guess it depends what happens tomorrow, how busy of a day I have. But I do have an obligation, or I made a commitment to call him. Now, this expression is commonly used in the past as well. So we've already talked about how to use it in the present simple, so let's talk about how to use it in the past. Let me give you an example. I could simply say, I was supposed to call my uncle yesterday, okay? I was, our verb to be is in the past, and it's conjugated with the subject, I. I was supposed to call. Remember, suppose and infinitive does not change. I was supposed to call my uncle yesterday. Now, question for you. If I say, I was supposed to call my uncle yesterday, did I call my uncle yesterday? What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Do you think yes, I did? Or no, I didn't? Let us know in the comments. This is very important to keep in mind. If this expression is used in the past, the action did not happen, okay? I didn't call my uncle yesterday. I was supposed to call my uncle yesterday, but it's commonly followed with but, and then you provide your reason. I was supposed to call my uncle yesterday, but I was really busy at work and I couldn't. So keep that in mind. The action did not happen. All right, let's summarize what we know. The expression is to be supposed to. After suppose, we have our infinitive. Suppose and infinitive never change. It's always like that. This is a verb to be expression. The verb to be changes according to your subject and your time reference. This expression is used with a commitment or an obligation that you have. We use this expression in the present simple to talk about a future commitment. We don't know if that future commitment will actually happen. We use this expression in the past simple to talk about an action that did not happen, even though you had an obligation or a requirement to do it. So now you know how to use the expression to be supposed to, and now it's your turn to practice. So make sure you leave 2 examples in the comments below. One in the present simple for a future event, and the other in the past simple for an action that did not happen. I can't wait to read your examples. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about the difference between the future simple and the future continuous.
Okay, this verb tense is the future continuous. The future continuous. That's our verb tense, okay? So that's what this is in. Future continuous. She will be demonstrating. And you know it's the future continuous for 2 reasons. Well, of course, we know it's the future because of will, right? So automatically we know it's the future. But it's not just the future because we have this ing verb like the student was talking about. But not only do we have the ing verb, we have the be verb as well. So the combination of will, be, and then an ing verb, that's how you know it's the future continuous. So the future simple is just will and a base verb. The future continuous is will, be, and then you put your verb in ing. It's always be because will is a modal, and after modal we use the base verb. So it's always be. That does not change. And then just add ing to your verb. So why are we using the future continuous here is now the question, because it's not just why we're using the ing. We're using the ing because it's the future continuous, and the future continuous requires the ing verb. But why is this sentence in the future continuous? So we use the future continuous to stress the duration of an action. So it has to be an action that's going to take place over a period of time. So there's a start to that action, and there's some sort of duration, and then there's an end to that action. That's when we can use the future continuous verb tense. There has to be some sort of duration. Now, here's the thing. The future continuous is not the most common verb tense, mainly because native speakers just will use the future simple instead. So often, the future simple can be used instead of the future continuous, and there's no difference in meaning. And that's what native speakers do a lot of the time. So for example, I'll demonstrate advanced ballet positions in class today. This is the future simple. Okay, so let me just put it side by side so it's very clear. I guess I should have said she'll to make it the same. And I won't use a contraction just to make it very obvious. She will demonstrate. This is the future simple. Will and base verb. She will demonstrate advanced ballet positions in class today. She will be demonstrating advanced ballet positions in class today. So this is the future continuous. Now, although they're in different verb tenses, and although we use the future continuous to stress the duration of an action, I don't hear a difference of meaning between these two. Like ultimately, the meaning is the same. So because of that, native speakers will just use the future simple. Now, let me just give you another example. I'll be reviewing the exercises tomorrow. I'll review the exercises tomorrow. Again, we have a future continuous and a future simple, but really I would say there's no difference in meaning. And if I say this one, but then my next sentence, I change it and use the future simple, there's no reason why I did that. Okay? If you really, really, really want to stress the duration of an action, then you can use the future continuous. If it's really important for the audience to know that there's a duration, then you can use the future continuous just to make it clear. Now, just an important note, just remember continuous tenses. Any continuous tense, so any tense that's in ing is a continuous tense. It can only be used with action verbs, so not stative verbs. And it can only be used if the action has a continuation. Many actions, they don't happen over a period of time. They just happen in an instant, okay? So for example, I'll be tired tomorrow. This is the future simple. But then I'll be being tired tomorrow. We can't do this in the future continuous because the verb be is a stative verb. So it can't exist in an ing form. So just remember that even if there is a duration to an action, but you're using a stative verb, your only choice is the future simple. So that's just a brief overview of the future continuous and the future simple to answer the question, why was this verb in the ing? Ultimately, the future continuous is not the most common verb tense in English. So as long as you're comfortable with the future simple, you'll be fine.
Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about the difference between going to go and will be going.
You could say, I'm going to call him later. Notice we have our verb to be. Our going, our gerund with go, and then we have to and a base verb. I'm going to call him later. Or, okay, so the structure of this. I just said it, but to say it again, now that you can see it, we have our verb to be, of course, here conjugated with their subject. We have going to, and then we have our base verb. So going to, and then our base verb of the verb call. So that's our structure here. Now, just a note, most students do this anyway, but just so you know, going to this section here, we pronounce it as gonna in spoken English. And that's just a natural pronunciation change that happens. We don't think about it consciously. I don't decide to say it. It just comes out naturally. It's just what happens with the combination of sounds. Now, we also use this in written English, but if you're going to use it in written English, it has to be an informal conversation because technically it's slang in written English. It's not an actual dictionary word. So if you want to use it in writing, definitely go ahead, but just make sure the context is informal. Okay, so when do we use this verb tense? I'm going to call him later. Well, we use this to talk about general future intentions. You can think about it as something that's 75% arranged. So you have your likelihood of doing it is very high, but there's still a chance that you won't do it, okay? So I might say, I'm going to watch a movie tonight. But remember, this is about 75% arranged. So there is still some element of it being not a finished plan, not a finalized plan. So this is my plan, but maybe I haven't picked the movie yet. I haven't decided on a time. I don't know where. There might be some elements that aren't definitive, but it's 75% arranged. So my plan could change. Like it is possible, but this is my intention for the future. Now, we could say, I'm going to call him tonight. Again, this is the exact same. This is my plan, but it could change because it's just an intention at this point. Now let's compare this. I'm going to call him later. I'm gonna call him later to I'll be calling him later. I'll be calling him later. This is a verb tense that native speakers don't use very often, to be honest. And that's the future continuous. The future continuous verb tense. It's not a very common verb tense, but it's still a verb tense. And there's still a time when you need to use it. So let's compare these two sentences. I'm going to call him tonight. I'll be calling him later. So this is the future continuous, the structure. We have will. This is our will right here. Then we have be. Here we go. You don't need to conjugate be. It's just always be. And then you take your verb and you put it in the ing form. So here our verb is call. So you just put it in the ing form. I'll be calling him later. Now, to give you another example, I might say I'll be watching a movie tonight. So all I have to do is change my verb from call to watch. and then just add an ing. So pretty easy to conjugate, right? Because no matter what subject you use, you're still using will as well. You'll be, she'll be, will be, right? There's no difference. So it's pretty easy for conjugation. Will be, and then your ing. So when do we use this? This is used in a very specific way. And that's why it's not the most common verb tense, because we only use it in one specific way, and that's to talk about something happening at a specific point in the future. Okay, that's when we use it. We don't use it just to talk about our plans for the future. We have to imagine that it's the future, and at that future moment, I'm doing something. And then I'm now describing what I will be doing in a future moment. So it's just not very common in conversation that we talk about that, right? We don't imagine a future moment and then tell someone what we will be doing at that future moment. We more so talk about it just as our future intentions. So that's why it's just not a very common verb tense compared to I'm going to. Oh, I'm going to do this, going to do that. Okay, and another limitation about this verb tense is the something that is going to happen, it has to have a duration to it, because we can't use this verb tense with stative verbs, okay? You can't use it. Whatever you're doing, there has to be a duration to your action. So that's another limitation of it, where what we will be doing at a future moment, it might not have a duration. So we can't use the future continuous. So now just, you know, the structure, you know, the overall, let's just look when specifically you're going to use one or the other. If you're talking about plans, arrangements, general future intentions, you're going to use be going to. If you're talking about an action taking place at a specific moment in the future, you're going to use the future continuous. So let's look at some examples on Youglish, just so you can see real native speakers using these two verb tenses in a natural context. So here's an example on Youglish. I'll be discussing things that I wish I knew starting out. Now, you only see one sentence, right? That's all you see. So I might add to this a specific future moment. So I might say, on Monday during the interview, I'll be discussing. During tomorrow's meeting, I'll be sharing. Next week at the conference, I'll be presenting. So it's almost like you're projecting yourself into the future, and you're talking about what you will be doing at that future time. But there has to be an action involved that has a duration, remember. So generally, when we use the future continuous, we do mention that time in the future, because it's important to know that when we use the future continuous. So this can be a useful thing when you use the verb tense, is state that future moment. Next week, when I'm on vacation, I'll be reading my favorite book, something like that. Okay, another example. I'll be listening to you breathing. Now remember, like there's a comma here, which shows that the example keeps going, but it will switch to a different screen, right? So I can only have this one screenshot. But if I just saw this as a sentence with nothing else, I'll be listening to you breathing. My question would be, well, when? When is this going to happen? unless it's obvious based on context. If it isn't obvious, you should state it if you're using the future continuous. So maybe it will be once the exam starts, because why else would you listen to someone breathing if you're not doing some sort of exam, some sort of, medical exam. So once the exam starts, I'll be listening to your breathing. I'll be asking you many questions. I'll be monitoring your heart rate. These are all the things that I'll be doing at this future time when the exam starts. So let's see just some examples with going to. Now, because this is such a common verb tense, I'm sure you're more comfortable seeing it. The first thing I'm going to do is, okay, remember, to be, so we have I am, to be, going to, and then our base verb is do. So this one's pretty easy. It's just a general future intention. That's it. Pretty easy. Or here's another one. I'm going to marry. Who I'm going to marry. So just talking about, again, a general future intention. Here, our base verb is marry, to marry. And then because our subject is I, we have the same auxiliary verb with our verb to be am. I am. I'm going to marry. Who I'm gonna marry. Who I'm gonna marry. So let's just see these two side by side so you can understand the difference between them. So I might say, I'm going to propose to Sarah. I'm using this example because this one he's talking about who he's going to marry. So I have marriage on the brain. I'm going to propose to Sarah. So imagine I just share this with a friend. I'm going to propose to Sarah. I'm just sharing, this is my general future intention. Remember, it's only about 75% arranged. So maybe at this exact moment, I don't know exactly when. I haven't picked the date or the restaurant I'm going to take her to or anything like that. But in my mind, I'm like, this is going to happen. 75%. Like I'm committed. Maybe not 100%, but I'm like more committed than I'm not committed to proposing to Sarah. I'm going to propose to Sarah. So general future intention. Now, I might talk about a future moment. I'm going to put myself in the future and say, I'll be getting married on Saturday at 2:00 p.m. Okay, so putting myself out, future timeline. It's Saturday, 2:00 p.m. What will you be doing? So that's the thing. This is why it's not that common, because who comes up to you and says, on Saturday at 2 p.m., what will you be doing? It's not that common, right? But it is common when we talk about goal setting. When you're thinking about your goals for the future, you might ask yourself, okay, this time next year, what will I be doing? I'll be X, Y, Z. So when you're goal setting, things like that, it is quite common to use the future continuous, but in an everyday context, it isn't that common to project yourself into the future and imagine this action taking place. It's more common just to talk about your general future intentions. So hopefully this helps seeing two examples side by side. And if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. How did you do with that quiz? Share your score in the comments and let's continue on to the next section. Now let's talk about how to use the sentence structure get used to. Now, as you may know, right now I'm in Colombia. Actually, right now I'm in a city called Medellin, Colombia. And because I'm in a new city, there's many things that I need to get used to. For example, I need to get used to speaking in Spanish. That's the obvious one, right? When you're in a new city, they don't speak your native language, you have to get used to the language that the city uses. And for me in Colombia, of course, that's Spanish. So notice how I just used that expression. I have to get used to speaking in Spanish. I also used it as a noun form. I have to get used to the language that they speak in the country you're in, okay? So just based on your understanding of the context, I'm in a foreign city, they don't speak my native language, Spanish isn't my native language, I'm not comfortable in Spanish. What do you think to get used to means? A lot of times you can understand the overall idea just based on context. Well, to get used to something is when you go from a feeling of discomfort to a feeling of comfort with something new in your routine, okay? So you're going to use this expression anytime you start something new. It could be a new job, a new hobby, a new activity, a new relationship. It could be living in a new city. It could be simply driving a new car. Anything that's new, you have to get used to it. There's going to be a period of time when whatever that new thing is doesn't feel comfortable. The only reason why it doesn't feel comfortable is simply because it's a new part of your routine, okay? So we use to get used to go from discomfort to comfort. And how do you get used to something? How would I get used to speaking in Spanish? What do you think? Honestly, how do you think I could get used to speaking in Spanish? Well, put it in the comments if you have an idea. Of course, it's by speaking in Spanish. That's the only way I'm gonna get used to it, is going out to a restaurant, ordering a meal in Spanish, doing it 5 days in a row, and guess what? The first day is going to be really awkward, really uncomfortable, and then I'm going to get more and more comfortable. And by the 5th day, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable with that simply because I've done it 5 days in a row, right? I'm getting used to it. So notice the verb tense there. I'm getting used to it because that's in progress. I'm moving from discomfort to comfort as we speak. Now, you've already heard lots of examples naturally, but let's just focus in on the sentence structure. So the expression is to get used to, okay? The to belongs to the expression, to get used to, and then to complete the sentence, you need either a gerund verb, so that's your verb in ing form, okay? To get used to speaking in Spanish, or you can have a noun, to get used to plus something plus a noun. So to get used to Spanish. Spanish is a something, it's a noun. I need to get used to Spanish. I need to get used to speaking Spanish. Now notice with both of these sentence structures, I use an additional verb. I need to, I have to, I should, I'm trying to. We would need something before it in this specific sentence. Now, in the present continuous, you can use get used to as your main verb. You can say, right now, I'm getting used to speaking in Spanish. So remember, we use this expression when anything is new in your routine. So let's imagine that you started a new job, okay? What do you think you would need to get used to? So a feeling of discomfort and go to a feeling of comfort. What do you think you would need to get used to? Give me an example. Make sure if it's a verb, it's a gerund, and you can use a noun as well. So give me an example and put it in the comments below. Take your time. Pause the video if you need. what would you need to get used to when you start a new job? Well, you would have to get used to, notice I said you would have to get used to because it's a hypothetical situation. You'd have to get used to your boss, so that's a someone. You'd have to get used to your boss. You'd have to get used to your colleagues. You'd have to get used to the policies of that organization. You'd have to get used to getting to work. So maybe you have to take a different route, or maybe you have to take the train instead of your car. So you have to get used to that new method of transportation. What else? You have to get used to the hours. Maybe the hours are different. You have to get used to your tasks. So maybe one of your tasks is editing videos because that's what I'm going to do with this video. Okay, so your new task is editing videos. You've never done it before, or maybe you're just not comfortable with the software that they use at this new job. So you'd have to get used to the editing software. You'd have to get used to editing videos. That's your verb in ing. You'd have to get used to the process that they use for editing videos. So there are so many things you'd have to get used to when you start something new. So let's have some fun with this. You've heard lots of examples using this at a natural pace. Hopefully you understand that sentence structure by now. If not, go back and review it. But let's practice this. So I want you to identify a new activity. Remember, it could be anything new. Maybe you joined a new book club, or you joined a new gym, or you bought a new car and there's something you have to get used to there, or you're in a new relationship, or you joined a new class. It could be anything. So it can be small events in addition to major events like moving to a new city or starting a new job. Those are major events. Moving to a new house for sure. But minor events you can definitely use this expression as well. So choose an event and then write at least one thing using the gerund form and one thing using the noun form that you need to get used to. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. And finally, your last section, let's talk about how to use the structure go plus gerund verb. Now, this is a sentence structure that we use in very specific situations. And that one situation is when we're talking about an activity that involves physical movement. So a lot of these are just the physical activities that you do as leisure activities. Now, when we talk about these, we don't follow our basic English sentence structure, which is subject plus verb plus infinitive, which is to and verb. So for example, I don't say, I go to hike every Sunday. Go is our verb. And in the regular sentence structure, the following verb would be in the infinitive, which is what you see here. But this is incorrect. We need our gerund verb, which is simply a verb with ing. This is an alternative sentence structure, an irregular sentence structure that we only use in specific cases. With verbs of physical activity and movement is one of those cases. So I need to say, I go hiking. I take my verb hike and I simply put it in the gerund form with ing. I go hiking every Sunday. That's the correct sentence structure. So just remember that this sentence structure is subject plus go plus gerund plus verb and ing. Now remember that go is our active verb and we're going to conjugate it according to the subject and the time reference. So when I say I go hiking every Sunday, That's my verb to go in the present simple conjugated with the subject I because I'm talking about a routine. But let's say my time reference is yesterday. It would be yesterday I went hiking. So remember, our active verb go is the one that's going to change and be conjugated with the subject and time reference, but the following verb, the gerund verb, doesn't change. It's going to stay in that gerund form. Yesterday, I went hiking. Now, I could change my subject and change my time reference, and I could say today, but as a future event, today she's going hiking. So here, my verb go is in the present continuous and is conjugated with the subject, she, but still hiking doesn't change. So remember that. It doesn't matter what your subject is or your time reference is. The verb go is going to be conjugated, but the verb in gerund form, your physical activity, is not going to change. Now, you're probably wondering, what activities can I use this structure with? So I'm going to give you a list of the most common. This isn't an exhaustive list. There may be others not on this list. So if you can think of one that isn't on this list, put it in the comments. So let's review this list together. Running, jogging, hiking, camping, canoeing, kayaking, diving, boating, shopping, snowboarding, skiing, climbing, fishing, surfing, horseback riding. There the verb is riding. Horseback just describes what type of riding, but our verb is riding. Horseback riding and dancing. Again, there may be other verbs of movement and physical activity that aren't on this list. If you can think of any, please put them in the comments below. Now, before you go, let's look at one advanced change to this sentence structure, okay? Let's look at this sentence. I could say, I enjoy going hiking. What's going on here? Now, you see two gerunds. The verb go is in the gerund form, verb ing, and then hiking, our activity, is in the gerund form. So always remember that the verb go needs to be conjugated according to the sentence structure, okay? So here I have I enjoy. Now, enjoy is a verb, but not just any verb. It's a gerund verb, which means the verb that comes next, in this case, go, that's the verb that comes next, it needs to be conjugated in the gerund form. So when you look at this sentence, we have two gerunds. Go is in the gerund form because it follows the verb enjoy, which is a gerund verb. Hiking is in the gerund form because it follows the verb go, and in the context of go plus physical activity, that verb of physical activity is in the gerund form. So as you become more advanced with English, you'll need to identify what's going on in a sentence. If this example is too advanced for you, that's okay. You can just focus on the information I said before and just forget about this one. But if you are at that level where you're nodding your head and you understand me, that's awesome. It shows you have an advanced understanding of English grammar and sentence structure. And if you're not there yet, don't worry, you will be one day. So now you have everything you need to talk about verbs of physical activity and movement. It's your turn to practice. I want you to leave 3 example sentences. Now, all 3 examples have to use different verbs of activity or physical activity movement, different subjects, and different time references as well. So I want you to get comfortable conjugating that verb with the subject and time reference. So put those examples in the comments. I can't wait to read them. Are you ready for your quiz? Here are your questions. Hit pause, take as much time as you need, and when you're ready, hit play to see the answers. Amazing job! You did it. Think of everything you learned in this lesson. Of course, come back and review specific sections anytime you need. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And why don't you keep improving your English with this lesson right now?